So now we're gonna switch gears. So it's my pleasure to welcome Phil, the next speaker today. And I think Phil is gonna take us back to ICRF in the early 80s. And yeah, Phil.
Thank you. And I'd like to begin also by saying what a privilege it is to be able to speak here today at this amazing celebration of David's life and career. And I'd like to thank Ros in particular for including me in it, and also Simon and Nick and the other organisers for all the hard work that they've done putting it together. So my title, Hairy Experiences Down Burton Hole Lane. As I just said to Julian, that's probably the best part of the talk. So took me ages to think of that. So Burton Hole Lane no longer exists. Well, Burton Hole Lane exists, but that building doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. That was the ICRF unit, Mill Hill unit. But my story begins about 18 months before I went there, which in this place. How do I have no idea how to use this. Is this the pointer everyone else has been using? Is it? Oh, it's that one. Okay, I was afraid if I pressed the big one, it would switch everything off. So, so 1980, August 1980, the famous EMBO Drosophila meetings. I managed to get, I was a PhD student, but I actually managed to get accepted onto it. I'm not quite sure how. Anyway, I went to this meeting, and I flew with Jimmy Sang, who was the head of the developmental genetics section at Sussex University, where I was doing my PhD, and he was a huge influence on me, very kind man as well. And I travelled with Jimmy to Athens, and then we got the boat from Piraeus to Heraklion. I think it took about 12 hours or something. So during that time, I got to bump into all of the participants, and as someone said earlier, they weren't a terribly friendly lot, actually. So by the time I got to Crete, I was thinking, I don't want to be here. Anyway, Jimmy said, let me in, we'll go to there was a big reception out here, and Jimmy said, come, I'll introduce you to some nice people. And David was standing almost right there where that pole is. I can remember it to this day. Walked out. That, of course, this photograph was taken sometime later, but I've used this. We didn't carry cameras around all the time then, so I don't have a photo from that moment. But that was the face that I saw with this big smile, and it was so great to see someone smiling. And he was just so friendly and just so immediately asked me what I was doing and so forth. And it's interesting. I wrote about this, and I mentioned this in my eulogy and wrote about it in the obituary, and so many people have written to me actually to say they had exactly the same memories and experience with David, that he was always, they met him very early in their careers and how friendly and open he was. So that was 1980, and then even better still at that meeting, I met Eric and Yanni. So they presented the work of their amazing screen. It was just prior to publication. And I think David probably introduced me to both of you. So there were 3 friendly people at the meeting. And this was, for me, this was the scientific highlight of the meeting, actually hearing the 2 talks that Eric and Yanni gave about these incredible mutations that they'd found. So, but that was sort of the end of it. I then went off to Strasbourg to do a postdoc. Things weren't going particularly well, and I saw an advertisement in Nature from David Ish-Horowicz looking for a postdoc, so I applied for it. And eventually, I don't know whether he'd sort of gone through a list of lots and lots of candidates, but eventually he called me up and said, was I interested? He was in this unit which had been set up by John Kearns. John Kearns had left by then. So I went and spent a day in Mill Hill, and it was the most exciting day I'd had in 2 or 3 years, actually, certainly since I'd finished my PhD. Again, this picture was taken a couple of years later, but we sat in this office and just talked most of the day. And he told me about his project, which was to clone one of the peral genes, which Eric and Yanni had isolated in their screen. it was called Barrel originally, and then it was found to be allelic to hairy. Did you discover that, or did David discover? Yeah. So it's found to be allelic to hairy, which immediately gave an entry point into cloning it through generating p-element insertions. This was pretty new, actually. Probably one of the first genes to be cloned in this way. And Andy Lee Brown, who is here somewhere, and Sheena Pynchon performed this screen to isolate lots of new alleles of hairy which were associated with insertions of p-elements, and that was how they cloned it. So they were just at the point, I think the day that I visited, they probably just isolated lambda clones with p-elements from one of these mutants, and Sheena was about to do hundreds of chromosome in situs to find the one which was in hairy. So I spent nearly all of the time with David, except lunch. He sent me off to the Adam and Eve with these three guys. I tried to get pictures of them from 40 years ago, but actually they've all aged very well. So these are all contemporary pictures, or mostly. And I got grilled by them. They were very suspicious of what Andy Flavelle described as a fly pusher. That was me. But David offered me the job, and then I joined, and it was an amazing place, actually, Burton Hole, the Mill Hill Laboratories in Burton Hole Lane. We were incredibly cramped. Everything was chaotic. And David managed to negotiate an extra room, because the room I showed before was his office and his lab, and then he had this was more like a corridor, actually, that people worked in. And this was Chris Rushlow, who joined shortly after I did as a postdoc. And Sheena was always rushing around. And this was Ken Howard, who you might have seen earlier today, actually. He was here, he's in a wheelchair, he's had MS for about 20 years. But Ken was a fantastic PhD student. And we were all squeezed into this space, and the energy was incredible. So that was the sort of lab family. And I've heard family mentioned a lot of times, and friendship mentioned a lot of times. And right from the moment I got there, I felt part of this family. It was so immersive experience being in David's lab. And in 1982, we were cooking Christmas lunch, and my friend Steve Kerridge, who is also in the audience today, was staying with us, and there was a knock on the door, and it was David and his sister. So they joined us for lunch. And this is 42 years ago, last year, when I met Ruth for the first time at David's funeral, and I told her about this, and she had no memory of it. So I was really pleased when I managed to find this photograph. And I know, Ruth, you're watching on Zoom, so hi. I hope you're enjoying it. And here's the photo again. And David played Christmas carols on the piano, because he was a brilliant pianist, and even turned his hand to playing my guitar, which he probably played much better than I did. So, a little bit of science, because Roz said she wanted to hear about science. So I'm getting there. I decided not to talk about anything recent, because in fact I haven't had an active research group for the last couple of years anyway. So I went back to a paper which is less known, but which we spent a lot of time on, actually. This was published in Genetics. So this was work this is work that I began as soon as I joined David's lab, doing lots of genetic analysis of hairy. So I sort of went into my comfort zone, into the fly lab. And this is interesting. The hairy mutation had been known for decades. And this is actually a hairy homozygous larva, which shows a partial peral phenotype. So this mutant had been around for decades and decades. And this is actually true of quite a few of the mutants that Eric and Yanni isolated, that there were pre-existing alleles. And I wrote a review about this a few years ago and said it was the genius of their screen was to screen for loss of function alleles, because it was only when you had loss of function alleles you could understand what these genes were doing. So it's very detailed. Some interesting things, like the fact that different alleles have different patterns of segment fusions. So this is really consistent. This allele, 5H07, always has a fusion of these two middle segments. The full deletion of the locus always fuses these two remaining abdominal segments. There's probably an explanation for that, but is there? I haven't thought about this for 40 years. I was hoping. oh. And then we isolated quite a lot of new alleles, including ones induced by X-rays. And this one turned out to be particularly interesting. I'll return to it in a minute. This is the zygotic phenotype. This is the maternal phenotype. So if this allele is inherited from the female parent, you get a much stronger phenotype. And again, I don't think anyone's ever explained that. Whether or not the stock still exists, I don't know, but I thought it could be my retirement project. But, and Sheena and I did a lot of, Sheena did all of the chromosome preps, and we tried to analyze these. This particular one defeated us, and I remember having to go to Cambridge and get Mike Ashburner to help characterize it. And then, I keep flashing to Jim Smith. Is Jim here? I don't know. I know this is one of your favorite photos, Jim. So like, as Ilan said, David used to say, David was getting a bit impatient, I think, because he didn't want to do all this hairy genetics. He wanted to do the molecular stuff. And he said, you've got to do in situ hybridization. And he showed me this protocol. So the in situs were pretty bad, actually. He showed me this protocol, which had been published by the Angras, where they use wax embedding and got really nice morphology in sea urchin embryos. But they were doing in situs for very abundant messages. Anyway, David said, try this and go and speak to Jim Smith, because he does lots of histology. He'll teach you how to do it. So I went off and found Jim Smith along the corridor, who was at the time postdoc with Jonathan Slack. And so this is what I was talking about. This is what the first oh God, what have I done? This is what the first in situs looked like from Walter Gehring's lab. And this was our improved, and actually this wasn't 2 months, Ilan, it was 3 days exposure. So this was 3 weeks from the Gehring lab. It's SS versified, true, yes. But anyway, so this opened up all sorts of new possibilities. We published this paper on the cloning and transcription pattern of hair in nature in 1985. And interestingly, if you go to PubMed, you won't find this paper. So I don't know whether any of you know this, but it's entirely discretionary which papers they decide to put on PubMed. And they decided this one didn't merit being, even though the other article in the same issue is on PubMed. So we did lots of experiments. It was just sort of a frenzy of in situs then, and we did lots of experiments looking at how these genes are regulated by other genes in the hierarchy. This is one I was particularly liked. We're looking at the expression of pairal genes and homeotic genes in mutants, gap mutants, the Krupel mutant. And this also allowed us to go back and probe these interesting X-ray alleles, which only cause partial deletions of some segments. And we actually found that they also resulted in the loss of specific stripes. And it turned out that this was because these X-ray alleles are rearrangements in the cis regulatory region. So they remove some, but not all of what we now know as the stripe elements. So that was the first demonstration of that, which was nice because it came through genetics rather than molecular biology. So it's an exciting time. We had lots of meetings. This was probably about 60 or 70% of the entire fly developmental biology community in 1984 in Sussex. That's Ken Howard, there's David, there's Ruth, Chris Rushlow, Alfonso Martinez Arias, Michael Acom, Nick Baker, Claudio Sunkel, Robert Whittle, my PhD supervisor. And in 1985, I was lucky enough to go to this meeting, the Cold Spring Harbor Symposium, to present some of this work. And Ken, and this, I tell this story because this is typical of David. David was invited, and I was invited. I was sort of surprised, so I got an invitation. And David let Ken go in his place, so the two of us were able to go and present the data. I only realized, actually, when I was looking for this photo, that David was one of the co-organizers, which is probably how I came to get an invitation. There's Ken there with Spiros Artavanis. There's the obligatory football team photo with David here. And Those were all the rage in those days, apparently. Sorry, I'm running out of time, but I do want to talk. David's had, as we've heard, masses of interests. Football was one of them. He was a United fan, Man United. I'm a Liverpool fan. Man United and Liverpool were playing in the Charity Shield, as it used to be called, at Wembley. So David says, I'll get tickets. So, okay, we get tickets. We go to Wembley, go through the gate. He's got his tickets in the Man United end. So I had to spend the whole match like this. And skiing. So that was the other quick anecdote. We were at a Ringberg meeting, and in those days, if you stayed a Saturday night, you could get a much cheaper air ticket. So David and I had both done that. And then David comes to me and said, Manfred Frasch is taking his students skiing to Meyerhofen. Do you want to come? So I said, okay. So we pile into Manfred's Volkswagen, drive to Meyerhofen, get the skis, rent the skis, go up the lift. Manfred gets off first, zooms off down the mountain. David and I get off next, and then the two students behind were looking, and the chairlift gets to the top, and they both fall over. And we sort of laughed, and we went and they said, we've never skied before. So we spent the whole afternoon bringing them down the ski slope. And I actually met one of them a few years later when I went to speak in Harvard, and he said, you probably don't remember me, but you taught me how to ski. Anyway, this was a meeting we both spoke at, segmentation meeting in 1988. And I'll finish with this, which was a very special moment for both of us, but it was very special to be elected to the Royal Society along with David. And of course, we signed the book next to each other because our names both begin with I. And Ros has got a great story about the dinner, but I'm running out of time, so I'll let you talk. Yes, the pockets. Yes. So I will end there. David's been a wonderful mentor, wonderful friend, and we miss him.
Any questions for Phil? Some questions? No? In that case, thank you, Phil, for this.